All right, today we're talking top five NBA players ever, but not including Michael Jordan or LeBron James
Bingo.
because they're already, pretty widely regarded as the top two.
Yep.
There's not a ton of debate there. So to make it a little more interesting, we decided to do the next top five, so three
Yeah.
through seven.
I like it. I mean, at the end of the day, at this point, if you don't have LeBron and MJ in your top two, you just don't know what you're talking about. So
Yeah.
there's no need to waste our time.
I'm interested to see how you ranked your list. Actually, that's something that I forgot to bring up in before we started recording. It's gonna be interesting to see how it like is it based on skill? Is it based on legacy? Is it based on era? Like there's different things here that come into play.
Without a
Because
doubt.
we didn't specify when we were talking about it, we didn't specify like the top five best players or the top five like
Right.
greatest. Like we just said top five, so
Yep.
there could be some interpretation differences
Come on
here.
now.
So
You
let's
know
see.
it.
Let's see.
Yeah.
We're gonna go one to five. Do you want to
Yeah.
start, or do you want me to go with my number three, but the top player on this list?
I can start. I can
All
start.
right.
So I've gone back and forth with this one, whether this is like easily number three all time for me, number one here, or if it's close. But I have Kobe. I know
Whoa.
I know a lot of people that will kind of act like Kobe is in that upper echelon where it's like the top three is LeBron, MJ, Kobe, and then nobody else is close. Um,
Whoa.
I think there's a lot of bias with, unfortunately, the fact that he's no longer alive, that people, the way he's sort of remembered as like a legend of old now almost adds
Mm-hmm.
to his hype. But um, there's a few reasons that I have him at three. Number one is the five rings, right?
Okay.
Like he's just a perennial winner, two finals MVPs, pretty widely regarded as one of the best scorers ever. He has a career points per game of 25. And then if you get rid of the first season he has, where he's 18 years old, where he averaged seven, and then the last one where he, really the last couple years where he was dealing with injuries and he was just old, he had kind of lost his step. Um, so if you look at like from ages like 19 to call it like 34, his points per game is going to be up a lot from 25. So he's obviously an all-time great scorer.
Mm-hmm.
He also is right up there with the best of them defensively. He's tied for the most first team all defensive teams ever. And then he's second all time with total. So he has 9 first team, 12 total, all defensive teams. So that's the thing that really sets it apart for me is every team that he was on, he was the number one option on offense, and he was also the number one option on defense. I
Even
guess
even
early,
with Shaq, you
I was
think?
going to say early in his career, maybe not the number one option offensively, but um, when people talk about him, like we in basketball, especially more than I mean, it's unique in the fact that every player is equally responsible for offense and defense.
Mhm.
Right? Like there's other sports where you're theoretically playing both offense and defense, but not every position is legitimately like equal weight on both, right? Like
Right.
you have a defenseman in hockey, like they can still score, and they still are involved in the offensive game, but it's not like you need to be a great offensive player, right? Like
Hmm.
your job mainly is to be a defensive player, or by like lots of sports. So Kobe was the best defender on every team he's playing on, one of the best defenders ever, along with the fact that he was so dominant offensively as a scorer. And then he also just has that will to win. It seems like, which is really hard to measure. So I don't always
It
love
is, yeah.
bringing it in, but his clutch factor. I mean, if you could watch a highlight reel of the insane shots he's made in the clutch over and over. He has some of the greatest single game performances ever. I mean, his 81 points against Toronto is ridiculous.
Is that the highest? I was gonna bring that up. Is that the highest since Wilt?
Yes, yeah.
Right. Okay.
Um,
He had
and
a
then
didn't he have a consecutive free throw record at some point?
yeah, something like that. I
I don't
forget
know if
how many it
someone
was.
broke it, but
Yeah, it
um,
was it was around that time. I remember the 81
yeah.
point game was in the midst of that free throw record. I mean, he has some of the craziest like months ever. Like he has 8 game stretches where he's averaging like well over 40, like crazy stuff. Um, and then when you just look at the way he can impact winning, when I watched, so recently I watched the documentary on the Redeem Team, which is the 2008 Olympic team for
Oh, that's
USA.
out. I gotta watch that.
You got to watch it, but it's
Yeah, I
the
want to watch
Redeem
that.
Team because the US lost in 2004,
Hmm.
which they hadn't ever done once NBA players were playing in the Olympics. And
Are
based
we
on the
talking the
skill,
Pau Gasol thing?
what?
Are we talking
So
about
that's
the Pau
that's
Gasol
one.
clip?
But a just the fact like the US shouldn't have ever lost, but everyone
Right.
talks about the impact Kobe had when he came into that team of like changing the culture, changing the work ethic of like everyone on the team, but then also the fact that he wasn't it's not like he came in and was just like, I'm going to be the number one offensive option. He came in and was like, I'm going to play defense harder than anybody. I won't even shoot in practice at first. I'm just going to be guarding the best player. I'm going to be hustling harder than everyone on defense. He just set like a culture of winning
Hmm.
that few players ever, maybe only Michael Jordan, other than him, have done. And so all those things combined, I just don't know that there's more than 2 players that are better than him. That if you're crafting a team, um, and you're starting with a guy when he's young, like you want to win championships,
Right.
I think Kobe's the third guy you take.
He's on my list. Do you want me to, should I reveal the number right now?
You
Or do we
you
want
can
to
yeah
get to
wait
it later? I have him as the fourth person on this list.
okay
I didn't I honestly thought that was maybe going to be controversial. I didn't know that he was, I don't know. I feel like some people don't have him ranked
yeah
super highly in terms of just like pure talent and stuff, but it is a lot of like when you think about guys that you want taking a shot at the end of the game, he is right at the top of that list. You
right
know, there's a few guys that you could go back and forth, but he is right up there.
yeah
Um, you mentioned, I mean, tragically has passed away. And potentially, maybe is overvalued, as crazy as that sounds by some people because of that. And there's the great quote about someone like Eminem, where it's like the worst thing that Eminem ever did was lived because like for his legacy, because if people, you know, their legacy ends too soon, it almost gets amplified.
right
Um,
right
and that's maybe something that's happening with Kobe, but he has the numbers to back it up for sure. And like you were
right
saying, mentality wise, um, I mean, I don't obviously I'm not a huge basketball expert, but something I can offer here is that I saw I don't remember if it was a video or if I saw this person in person, but someone who coached I believe the US Olympic team and Kobe specifically on mentality was
hmm
saying like he's by far the most impressive mental athlete that he's ever worked with. There was
right
a clip of Kobe when he was a young player, um, I believe at the end of a game, taking big shots, and it's like air ball, air ball,
yep
air
yep
ball, and then I don't remember if it's the same game or a game soon after, but he just keeps he a lot of players, you know, would pass that ball up the next time
right
because they lose confidence. But the mental strength of Kobe to then keep taking a shot, and I think he eventually nails a huge shot,
right
either in that game or soon after. It's just incredible. Great play, and someone who I hated watching as I was a
Boston
bigger
guy yeah you
Celtics
have to
fan when I was younger, certainly than I am
yeah
now.
yeah
But after his career, there's absolutely no denying just the talent and the impact this guy had. And one thing I also was going to mention, um, to in case having him on this list was going to be controversial, which uh, I wasn't sure if it
it's
was
not
going to be.
yeah
Um, but the legacy that he's left in terms of how many guys in the league right now would name him as the guy that they looked up to,
yes
even more so than a guy like LeBron or
oh yeah
any of the like think about how many guys Kobe
oh
is
yeah
the guy that they wanted to be. And
it's
so I
crazy
mean that is another almost immeasurable aspect of his legacy.
yeah his like impact on the current generation of basketball
Hmm.
players is like is unmatched, really.
Yeah.
But
Also,
we get to
potentially the only guy, I don't know if this is a fact or not, but potentially the only guy to have an Academy Award listed on his basketball reference page.
it might be. You're probably not wrong.
Actually,
Probably
good
not wrong.
short film too. I remember watching it
Yeah,
when he won. It's a good short film.
yeah, yeah.
Surprised he only won one MVP. A little
Yeah, the
bit.
MVPs are always tough because it just sometimes it just kind of the MVP award is really just who
Yeah.
had the most impressive statistical season at this point.
I personally don't put a ton of weight on it for the NBA
Mm-mm.
compared to other leagues MVP awards. So not
Yeah,
really a detracting factor when I was
right.
looking
Like,
at it, but it just was like I kind of figured he'd have
yeah,
more.
right. Like Steve Nash has two. So
Yeah.
that's kind of all you need to know of like that award is just kind of
Yeah.
it. Like realistically, LeBron should have like 10. Kobe should have had more. Shaq should
Yeah.
have more. Like there's a lot of guys that just that's not a great metric at this point because of the way people win them. But you can
Yeah.
talk about why you
Fair
have
enough.
them below the guys you have ahead of them, but who you have one.
I have Kareem as one. I
Okay.
mean, all-time scoring leader. I mean, just one of the most iconic players. And again,
Hmm.
another legacy thing, right? Like everyone knows the sky hook. Um, he's a very, you know, identifiable person, partially because he's huge, but
Sure.
also just kind of like the look he had while he was playing.
Yeah.
Six-time champ.
Hmm.
Um, I mean, just one of the all-time greats. I
Yeah.
don't want to bore people with too many statistics because I don't, I'm not a huge basketball guy, but
That's
Kareem
okay.
is one of the guys I feel like,
Hmm.
and he's one of the guys where we were talking last night, and you were saying like MJ and LeBron are one and two, no questions asked. And I was like,
Hmm.
I would listen to someone if there, if there's a few people I would listen if they were like,
Hmm.
oh, this guy's number two. I think Kareem would be one of those people. Like, I think someone who is more educated on basketball than I am could make a decent enough case to put Kareem to with some of the accolades that he had.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. He's certainly an all-time great.
Yeah,
I mean, his like the sky hook, he like the fact that there's a signature shot or move that is completely attributed to one person is, I mean, it's
yeah,
iconic, right?
right.
Um, and he dominated the league in the 70s, 80s. Um, all-time great player for
With
sure.
some great like great teams also,
Oh yeah,
competing with him.
yeah, yeah. I
There's
mean,
some people
those.
who, people will say, oh, certain players did not play in an era where there's a lot of competition. Kareem played with competition and still had a very successful career.
Yeah,
To the
he did
extent
play
that
in the
there's
70s.
competitions now, maybe not, but
Yeah,
it
yeah, yeah.
wasn't like he played against college kids his whole career.
Right, right, yeah. Um, I mean, he played. He was in the midst of the Lakers Celtics rivalry. There are a number of
Right.
great teams in the '80s as well. Sort of like the '80s was like the revival of the NBA because it was really
Yeah.
dying in the '70s. But he is a great player for sure.
Also, two fantastic names. One of those guys that switched his name at one point. Kareem Abdul-Jabbar is a great name, but
Uh,
also
no doubt.
Ferdinand Lewis Alcindor Jr. What a name. Just two
Unbelievable,
cool
without a doubt.
names.
Yeah,
Yeah. Is
for
does he
sure.
make your list? I'm
No,
curious.
he didn't. He didn't.
Whoa.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So,
I feel like
so
that's kind of a hot take from you.
probably first of all, the whole all-time leading scorer.
Uh-huh.
I don't think there's a stat that I care less about in sports. It just is, and like here's why. The amount of points that are scored by
Hmm.
NBA players is crazy, right? So
Right.
if you play 1 year dip more than somebody, you're going to score a lot more points than them if your points per game average is similar,
Yep.
right? So if you spread that out over a full career, your total points cannot really reflect how good of a scorer you are, in my opinion. So Kareem, for
To an
example.
extent, though. I
Okay,
mean,
okay.
you're
So
not going to
Kareem,
become the all-time scorer by scoring like 10 points a game.
no, of course, but let's like Kareem is not a top five scorer of all time, in my opinion, and I would
Okay.
argue it's like pretty definitive. Um, he was a good scorer. He averaged
Hmm.
24 a game for his career,
Yeah.
but like he averaged 24 a game. Look, Michael Jordan averaged 30 a game for his career, and he
Right.
scored less total points than Kareem, right? Like Michael Jordan's a better scorer than him. Kevin Durant is a better scorer. Kobe, Iverson,
Hmm.
LeBron is a better scorer than him. Um, so to me, that stat is just like it reflects that he's obviously an all-time great player for sure,
Right.
but it's not like it. He's not the best scorer of all time. He's not in the top few. Like that points per game is way more important to me than total points scored. Um,
Okay.
and that's
But
probably the
but counterpoint to do, 24 points per game for like when you're doing that over 20 years or whatever it was that he did,
sure, but I
being able
real
to play that long and have that's a solid average, you
right,
know.
but he could have also had a good prime, and then I forget exact numbers, but I think his last 5, 7, 8
Take over.
years, he's just averaging in the teens, but he's just playing so long. Um,
He's like the last 3 years he dropped off, but he was going up until so probably 17 years of 20 plus points per game.
so great, he's great, he's great.
Yeah.
Um, this like he would be in my top 10 players for sure. Like he's probably if we made added this list, added one person, he's on my list. Real, I
Okay.
think. But I just don't. I think all the players I have on my list, I think if you really just look it down, I think they are better basketball players than he was. Um,
Fair. And that might be, that's probably a difference in how we curated
yeah,
both of our lists.
I will say he's a player. I've watched a lot of basketball, whether it's highlights or a lot of like full NBA games. So I've
Mhm.
seen a lot of players that played before I was alive, and I've like really seen them play. So I have a good sense of their game, not as much as if I actually was watching it
Right, right.
live, right? But Kareem's one I haven't watched as much. So I could be wrong, but based on what I see, I don't have him up there.
Yeah. And this is a list that we mentioned, like there's a lot more disparity in
Yeah,
this
for
list.
sure,
You could
for
mix
sure.
around depending on how you think about these players, you can mix them around a lot. So
Yeah.
who is your second player
All
that you
right.
have on this list?
So,
So fourth all time.
yeah, second and three on this list for me are really tough. They're both
Yeah.
super close, and I go back and forth. Um, my second is Larry Bird.
Whoa, I have him later on my list.
That's okay.
I thought,
So
oh, that's another one. I thought I was going to be controversial for even having him on the
yeah,
list at
and
all.
it might be considered controversial that I have him this high, but um, Larry Bird, when I look at him, is like the ideal basketball player.
So you're going very purely based on talent and like skill, like ability, it
Well,
seems
I mean,
like.
no, winning also matters,
Right,
but
but it seems like as opposed to I don't know, longevity numbers like that, you're going very like the eye test is big here for
yes,
you.
yes.
Yeah.
The eye test, and then they're also like their production, their winning,
Hmm.
the it factor, if you want to call it that, because Larry Bird's
Yeah.
another one that was just clutch. Like people talk about the way people talk about playing against Larry Bird was all like, no, like he was insane. He was
Yeah.
unstoppable. He was just cold blooded. Like there was nothing you could do to stop him.
One of the most
Um,
iconic stories, like folk stories in history with the 3-point contest.
the list goes on. I mean,
Yeah.
the 3-point contest, walking in saying who's going to finish second. The
Playing a game left-handed.
Okay, that's the thing. He's getting bored, so he just shoots lefty. Um, what was it another one? He was it Byron Scott maybe? It's like tie game late against the Lakers. Timeout, they draw up a play for a game-winning player, walks over. He's like, "Hey, just so you know, um, this guy's gonna come up, set a screen here for me at the top of the key. I'm gonna run around the screen, catch the ball right there, and then I'm gonna turn and shoot it in your face and win the game." And then like he told him to play, and then he did it. Like stuff like that. That's just ridiculous.
Hmm.
Um, and he just played the game so beautifully. Like his highlight tape might be my favorite to watch, just in that his passing was phenomenal. He was a great rebounder. He could shoot the ball, he could score in all phases of the game. Like, and he wasn't super athletic. There's just something about it. Is like It's just beautiful basketball.
Hmm.
Um, just some numbers to go with him. So obviously he's averaged 24 a game for his career, um, 10 rebounds a game for his career as a three, which is really impressive, right? Like his job wasn't rebounding, but he was still a great rebounder. And then his just shooting ability and his efficiency, especially at his day and age, right? Like the 3-point line was invented around when he like started playing basketball at the high level. Um, and he's almost a 50-40-90 shooter for his career. So that's 50% field goal, 40% from the 3-point line, 90% from the free throw line is sort of that's like the elite like shooting measurables. Those there's not many people that have done that in a single season, and he was pretty close. He's off by just a couple percent in each category from being a 50,
Hmm.
40, 90 shooter, where his efficiency, his range was incredible. He's also a three-time all defensive um, team player. There were 3 years he made the all defensive list. And then, of course, he was a winner. He's on some of the best teams ever, in which he was sort of the centerpiece of those teams. So the way he played the game was incredible. The will to win, again, the clutch factor. People talk about him as being, one of the clutchest players ever. So I have him up there at two on this list, fourth all time. He's just unbelievable.
Interesting. I have him
Yeah.
as my fifth player,
Okay.
so seventh all time. I was surprised to see that he was only three-time champ, but
I know.
unfortunately, he's a guy that similar, and this is a very interesting comparison that I have never dove into a lot, but I think is I wonder if there are people that have really dove into this. Very interesting that you have Larry Bird and you have Bobby Orr, both Boston legends who
Mm,
are some of the best players to have ever
mm,
played their sport, but had their career cut short because of unfortunate injuries that just
mm.
kind of debilitate.
Right.
Both of them also came back from the injuries, but just
Mm,
were not the same and ended up
right.
having to retire.
Right.
Um, I
Yeah.
was reading about Bird's injury and that he did it paving his mother's driveway. Some of the, I mean, just stories about Bird are awesome. My grandfather was a huge Larry Bird fan, and
Oh yeah.
he was a big basketball fan at the time when Larry Bird was within his prime, and he's
Yeah.
basically told me like Larry Bird was the guy, similar to how we were saying like every player now dreamed of being Kobe or whatever. It was like if you asked anyone who didn't hate the Boston Celtics at that time, like who's your favorite player? It was Larry Bird. Like he
Yeah.
was just the guy. And
Yeah.
then I mean, he's told me stories about how you could drive through Boston, or I don't actually know if it was in Boston, but a town near Boston for sure. On like a Sunday afternoon, and Larry Bird would just be out mowing his lawn, like in
Yeah.
the front. Like
Just
he was just such a normal dude that was just
right.
really, really good at basketball.
Yeah.
Um, only reason I had him lower was just because he didn't have quite the career like that some of these guys had in terms of longevity but like not his fault, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but just had to put him a little lower. I also wasn't I honestly thought about putting him higher, but I just wasn't confident enough
Yeah.
to do that. I thought maybe
Yeah.
I might be biased
Oh,
as someone that grew
that's
up in Massachusetts.
yeah. That's all right. I
But yeah,
I can't really get that bias because I'm not a Celtics fan, even though I grew up here.
right.
So it's
So
but
honestly, I'm glad to hear you have him high there.
there you
Highly
go.
interesting that your first two players are my last two players.
Yeah, I know.
Funny,
So
funny how
who do
that
you
is.
have second?
I have Magic Johnson.
Okay.
Um, this is another one like I would love to have him lower on my list because he was a Lakers player, but it's just so hard to find like negatives with him.
Yeah, it is.
Like one of the most revolutionary players, I think, is
Mm,
probably not a hot take to say. You know,
hmm.
a 6'9" point guard, right? Like I remember
Right.
hearing that the first time and not believing it at
Yeah,
all. Because I'm like,
because
that can't be true. I knew he was a point guard. Someone said, "Oh, he's
right,
6'9". I'm like, no, that's not true because he was a point guard.
right.
I'm like, no, he was six
He
nine.
was. Yeah.
Um,
No one had ever been that size playing point guard.
yeah,
and it was a long time after him before we've had anyone else that did it. Like
Right.
we've got a handful of guys now that, you know,
Yeah.
LeBron is more or less point guard, Ben Simmons, right, 6'10",
Right.
even Luca, big
Pretty big. Yeah.
playing point guard, but nobody was handling the ball, running an offense at 6'9"
Yeah.
at that time. Like
And you
it's
mentioned highlights with Bird. Like watching Magic Johnson highlights
oh yeah.
are awesome. The way
Oh
that he
yeah.
moved the ball, the way that that team played, the Hollywood Lakers, the Showtime Lakers, like it was just awesome to watch some of those
Yeah.
highlights. And you know, Magic and Bird, one of the best rivalries ever. Maybe the best
Probably the best.
individual rivalry.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you
and
think about it, basically they won 8 championships between the two of them in
yeah,
a span of like 10 years,
yeah.
where it's like it was just back and forth between the two of them.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And even going back into college too, right?
Yeah.
They
Yeah.
played. I think they played national championship, right?
Yep. Yep.
Um,
Michigan
so
State and Indiana.
one of the great rivalries in all of sports, honestly. Great
Hmm.
individual rivalries. Um, like I've said before, not I don't have all the basketball intelligence here, but Magic Johnson is just one like he stands out even if you know nothing about basketball.
Yeah. Yeah. He's actually third on my list. And so that's
Okay.
why I say I have the two of them close.
Yeah.
I struggle to differentiate the two. Um, the biggest thing in Magic's favor is probably like he won more.
Hmm.
Um, but his ability to pass and the way like the way they played the game where it's just get the ball and go out and run in transition, play on the fast break. Magic's ability to lead the fast break as a 6'9" point guard, like he can run down the floor and score
Sort of a
easily,
very
right? Like
modern style
yes, he
that
could run
they
the floor.
played 30 years prior.
Yeah. But then you watch the way he passed the ball, the way he got teammates involved. Um, I mean, like he could score the ball well. He did it efficiently. He averaged like 18 or 19 um, per game for his career, but he had seasons in the 20s. But then it just his assists were unreal. Um, and I think one of the coolest story to me about Magic was I believe it's his rookie year, one of his early years. They're in the finals, and Kareem gets hurt. So Magic switches from playing point guard. He instead starts at center, and he scored like 40 from starting at center. Where it's just like this guy is 6'9" point guard, can play any position.
Right.
It really felt like there was nothing that he couldn't do. Um, if he was playing now, his shooting would obviously be a little bit of a something held against him, but people weren't shooting at the
Hmm.
time. It was a different game. So like he was such a dominant player. The only reason that I had LeBron, what am I saying? Larry Bird ahead of him was just the range of what Larry Bird can do, right? He was a phenomenal scorer. He was a little bit of a better rebounder. Wasn't quite as good a passer, but Larry was still a great
Great
passer.
passer, super
That's
underrated from what I've
right.
heard.
So it seems to me the stuff that Magic was better at, Larry was still great at. Some of the
Okay.
things Larry was great at, Magic wasn't. Like
Hmm.
Larry's a great shooter. He
Right.
was a phenomenal scorer. Magic wasn't on that level. And then also Magic never made an all defensive team, whereas Larry Bird made a few. So it seems he was a slightly better defender. So it's very close. So people have Magic ahead of Larry Bird, and it's
Hmm.
there's an argument to be made. I just though that's what kind of put Larry ahead of him for me.
Yeah.
But
Very, very fair. I didn't
yeah,
even realize I'm looking at Magic's page right now. He's not as bad of a shooter as I thought he was based on what I heard and stuff. Like he was
yeah, no,
obviously not, phenomenal or anything, but he was all right.
yeah,
He wasn't
yeah,
Ben Simmons level.
no, no. Then again, few have ever been.
Yeah. Yeah, man.
But yeah,
All right, so he's your three. My
yeah,
third one is probably the most controversial one in terms of our discussion. I
okay.
know that for a fact. I don't know how controversial it is as a general basketball take, but I'm sure you'll give me some pushback on this one. I have Bill Russell, and
Mm-hmm.
I know all your arguments against it, but
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you know a lot of mine. But the guy is the greatest winner to ever play North American sports. I think that just because he played in an era that is deemed less competitive should not be held against him necessarily, because it's not his fault he was born when he was. It's not his fault he played, like, he still had to go out and win, and he played against some good players. Like, it's not like he played against you and me. There were still
That's
some good
true.
players, and none of them won like he did.
Yeah.
Maybe not, maybe doesn't have the gaudiest numbers in terms of like offense and whatnot, but um, great defender, a great winner. Also won, I think, two titles as a coach, a player coach, which
Yeah.
is,
He had a weird
pretty
role. Yeah.
cool, pretty cool.
Yeah.
Something to be held accountable for. And yeah, I just think that he gets disrespected a lot. I wanted to show him some love here. I think he's one of the all-time greats.
I mean, he's an all-time great. He's certainly a legend. You can't tell the story of basketball without talking about Bill Russell, right? He's one of
Mhm.
those, if you wanted to boil it down to the smallest list you possibly could for like people that need to be mentioned when you talk about the history of the game, you like there's no list you can make in which he's not on it, right?
Right.
So um he deserves that respect. And he also, no, he just passed away very recently. It was pretty cool being at the first Celtics game of the year this year. They did a lot to honor him, which is just like well deserved because his
Yeah.
impact off the court also, his work in the community fighting for human rights, things like that, is just pretty incredible. So I don't want to make it seem like I'm disrespecting him in any way. He's incredible, but at the
He's
end of the
nowhere
day,
near your list.
he's close. No, he's close. But if you just look at like him as a basketball player,
Hmm.
I just don't think you can argue that he was better at basketball than the guys that I have on my list. Like, it's not his fault that he played against a bunch of scrubs and like five good players,
Hmm.
but like that is a reality. And like I've watched games that he played like start to finish pretty much. Um, I mean, it's just horrible. Like that it is
Yeah.
horrible basketball that they were playing back then. And
Do you think there's any argument that maybe Bill Russell was, an elite basketball player, and he just didn't need to show it all the time?
I don't know, maybe, but if that was the case, he's probably scoring like 100 a game. Like, what do you mean he didn't need
Oh,
to show? He was more
maybe he
evolved.
didn't want to. He's an
Okay,
entertainer. He's keeping
yeah,
it fresh for the fans.
yeah, I think that's a load of nonsense. Like he's an all-time great, right? Great rebounder, great defensive player. I mean, his ability to protect the rim. Like he would be a great player now, no
Hmm.
doubt. Um, but to me, if you look past the fact that he won 11 rings because he wasn't, there were like 8 teams and only two of them were like any competition and they weren't even close to as good. After that, like what's the argument there? He's historic, he's a legend, but I just
Hmm.
don't think if you're looking at a basketball player, if I'm drafting a team, again, he's not in my top 5, top 7 picks. Like there's just been a solid number of players that I think are better than him, that
Hmm.
will impact winning, that improve your team more than him. He's not far from the list.
Yeah.
It's not like I'm choosing 50 players over him or even he'd be in my top 10, but um he's just not quite on my list here.
I almost did not put him on here, but I read some compelling arguments for his defensive ability,
Sure, sure.
that allowed me to be somewhat confident in putting him on this list. And I think there is something to be said, although there was not as many good teams back then. I've heard a great argument that you know he had to play the good teams more often, so there's that. There was less, like, you know kind of easy wins or whatever. Like, you're playing the same teams more often, so he played Wilt a lot. And
Yeah.
the Celtics are the winningest team in NBA history, and he
Mhm.
is the winningest player on that team. He's accounted for over half of the Celtics championships.
Oh
So,
yeah. I mean, yeah.
um,
It,
yeah,
he was an incredible winner, right? And he dominated his era, but
yeah,
um
yeah.
I'm sorry, you take the 4 seed from every year post like I don't know 1990. and they will beat that Celtics team every time they play. So, um,
Maybe. I'm also a big believer that if you were to take Bill Russell and if he was born, I mean, when was he? He was born 1934. So if he's born, 30 years, if he played 30 years later,
sure,
basically,
he'd probably be better.
I think he plays maybe not quite as dominant as he was then, but I think he is, you know,
Yeah,
up there with the top players in any
probably.
era if you give him those resources.
Yeah,
Again,
it's
tough thing to
impossible to
debate. This is
prove.
where it gets tough with eras.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, but I
yeah.
knew
And
that I knew there was going to be. I mean, we've talked
yeah,
about it before, so
yeah. And
I knew
I
there was going to be
really
some
try not,
discrepancy.
I try not to compare eras too much because it just gets too hard. The game's so
Yeah,
different, but it's just like when you watch the '60s, it's just too like blatant where it's just like
mm,
this is not the same game. Like if you watch, there's probably like every D3 basketball team in the country right now is probably like better than a lot of those teams at the time.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like um that's just
Which
it's pretty
ultimately,
grim.
for the health of the sport, you want. You
Yes,
want the
no,
sport to be good
right.
overall.
So he's an
But yeah,
all-time great, but just
yeah,
yeah,
totally get the argument. But
yeah,
again, another one that it's just a difference in how we thought of this list.
yeah, yeah,
Who do you have? We know my 4 and 5.
yeah.
We don't have to
So
touch on them too much. We can maybe
yeah,
give a couple of things, but who
yeah.
is your 4?
My four is Shaq.
Mm,
Um, I mean, it's constantly he is described as the most dominant basketball player ever.
yeah,
Um, it it is terrifying the things that he would do on a basketball court where he just physically was an absolute monster. Like there's just nobody that could handle his size, his strength, his explosiveness. Like there's highlights from early in his career where he's taking the ball and he's running up the floor and then and dunking on people. The highlights where he just catches it down low and there's a 7-footer guarding him and he just one dribble turns and just destroys the rim, dunks on him. It's
hmm,
crazy what he could do. And the scoring output that he had, obviously a 4-time champion, 3-time finals MVP. He's just sort of a freak like we have never seen in basketball. And his just pure dominance physically is so unmatched. The only other person that is physically dominated the game, even remotely similarly to him, is Giannis now. Um, and very different way, right? Where Giannis is a lot
yeah,
more mobile. Giannis is a lot of Euro step in the basket, whatever, but just like scoring in the paint. Um, physically, there's no way to stop him. What Shaq could do is just insane. And so I feel like he has to be on this list for me. The way he just impacts a game, the way he completely like a defense, they're just sole focus is we have to find a way to slow Shaq down. It like you would just be consumed by this one guy is crazy. So that's
yeah.
why he's on my list.
Made the finals with 3 different teams, won it with 2. Pretty interesting. Like when you look at his career, just how many different teams a guy of this caliber played for.
Yeah, and
It's always
he
fun.
had
Like
a
in any sport, it's always funny when you
yeah.
get these kind of guys.
I think we forget, at least I will forget, like how long he played with the Magic and Lakers, right? Like he played the majority of the '90s. Um,
Hmm.
so then by the mid to late 2000s, when he's playing for a different team like every year, that's really the end of his career, right? Like him
Yeah,
on the Celtics, on the Cavs, on the Suns, that wasn't this dominant basketball player, right? It was
right.
the Magic and Lakers were his that stretch of years, his prime, where he was just unbelievable. And then he was still very good with the Heat as well.
Hmm.
After that is where it's sort of he's not the same guy. But
Right. An all-time
yeah.
great human too. Like
Oh yeah.
a lot of I mean, we're talking about like Larry Bird stories, like
Yeah.
whatever on a lot of the on the court stuff, but like a lot of Shaq's best stories are off the court stuff. Like, he was in a jewelry store and someone was having trouble paying for an engagement ring and he just went over and like bought the ring and
Yeah.
paid that off for that guy. Like
Yeah.
just
So many stories
leaving
like that.
insane tips at restaurants and stuff. Like just a awesome awesome human being and a guy that like just gets what it means to be a good person.
Yeah, he's incredible, and he's also like great on TV. Like
Yeah, he's
the list of
hilarious.
things that's great about this guy is long, but
Yeah,
that's why he's at four.
yeah,
What
very
made
fair.
what put Kobe just below the guys you had above him for you?
Um, Again, sort of similar to why I had Bird so low was I just wasn't super confident in putting him higher. I didn't really have a good case to be made, in my opinion. Um, I feel like he sort of is at a disadvantage in the sense that he played, during MJ's time and then
Mhm.
also played during like he's played against two of the best players to ever play. Like he kind of is almost overshadowed by them. Obviously not overshadowed because we all know who Kobe Bryant is, but
Yeah,
in the sense of like he never really got his time to shine. Um,
yeah,
I don't know that he was necessarily ever like the very, very best player. I mean, he very well could have been. I just didn't wasn't able
yeah.
to say that with
I think he
confidence.
is, but there's a small
Yeah, very small
chunky
window.
years because he sort of
Um,
had his window where Shaq had left and he was starting to dominate those mid
mhm.
2000s. Um, and then
And
late
then LeBron
2000s,
showed up.
LeBron was in there. And there was a
Yeah.
handful of years where like the conversation was who's better, right? Like
Yeah.
2009 is still a shame that the Magic made the finals, so we couldn't get that LeBron Kobe matchup, which would have been historic.
Hmm.
But um, there's not many years where he was the undisputed best, right? Like
Right.
Jordan had a decade where at least where there's no question he's the best player.
Hmm.
There's no one doubting it. LeBron has had a decade, right? The 2010s where nobody who knows what they're talking about is saying there's someone better than LeBron at
Right.
basketball at this time.
Right.
Kobe didn't have that long stretch for
Right.
sure.
And that's partially why I put someone like Bill Russell ahead of him because he had that era where he just dominated
Yeah.
on the league. And well, I mean, one thing I did want to say in defense of Kobe that I forgot to mention earlier, similar to the stat that you'll see about Tom Brady, where he's had two Hall of Fame careers with
Mm-hmm.
the
Mm-hmm.
first dynasty, the second dynasty. I mean, when
Number.
they were deciding what number to retire, and
Mm-hmm.
obviously they ended up doing both. But when you look at those stats, that's pretty incredible.
Oh yeah.
It's obviously not the same kind of thing as like Brady, where it's two distinct ages, but it is
Right.
a cool kind of like separation. Like you have
Yeah.
a point in his career where you can separate it into two distinct, very
Right.
valid Hall of Fame careers.
Yeah.
So that was going to be a point that I was going to use to defend him if it turned out to be a hot take.
Yeah. But
Um,
that's not. Well,
yeah. So who's your number four?
number five,
It's
no, number five.
or five for you.
Five,
Yes,
five for
five.
me. Maybe the hottest take I'll have.
All
I don't
right.
know if you're going to find many lists. Tim Duncan is number
Okay.
five.
Yeah, he was on my short
So,
list because I saw him around the top five on a lot of people, like a lot of lists
yes.
that I looked up. Um,
Yeah.
so yeah,
So
speak about him.
I think he's a wildly underrated player. Just because he nothing he did was flashy,
Yeah.
right? Um, and he was not a big personality. Like he's the guy, he'll show up as, the best one of the best players in the NBA and he's wearing a pair of jeans and a shirt that you could get at like Target, basically.
Hmm.
Um, and he just didn't want the spotlight. He was super humble, he was quiet. Um, all these things that just he's not going to get the hype. But when you look at what he was able to do throughout his career, right, where he came into the league and as a rookie just dominated right away, right? He was the number one overall pick, won the rookie of the year, averaged 21 a game, um, almost 12 rebounds and 2.5 blocks a game as a rookie. Like, it was just crazy. He was an all-star in his first year in the league. His ability to win, he won 5 rings, 3 finals MVPs, was
Very
a
spread
part
out
of,
as well.
right. I was going to say he was a part of the longest dynasty, so to speak, where the Spurs from his like rookie year up until he retired they
Mhm.
were a phenomenal team every year. Like the streak of years where they won at least 50 games, I'm pretty sure is the longest um ever. I could be wrong, but he was the centerpiece of those teams all the way through. Towards the end of his career, the last few years, he wasn't a great player, right? Kawhi at that point was better than him. Manu and like Tony Parker are probably bigger players, but the vast majority of his career, he was the main piece. Um, just within one of the best teams ever orchestrated. The way they just a bunch of selfless, humble guys that had no ego that just played the game the right way and won for years.
Yeah.
But the thing that's crazy about him, so 20, he averaged 19 a game for his career, 10 rebounds a game, all scoring efficiently. And then he also has the most all defensive team selections ever. He has 8 first team and then 7 second team, where just on the defensive end, he was just as dominant the offensive end the whole way through. Um, it's just hard to argue with his all around production, his impact on every facet of the game, and then the way he won. To me, it's like you got to just put him up there. He was so dominant in just an unappreciated way because it just
Yeah.
his highlight reels aren't going to wow you
Right.
necessarily, right? He's not dunking on people like Shaq left and right. He's not running the floor passing like Magic. He's not shooting threes, but he's just playing the game the right way and he's impacting every level at about as high a level as anyone ever has. So
Hmm.
to me, he's got to be up on this list.
Yeah. Super. Maybe a very good claim to be the most underrated player in NBA
Yeah,
history.
without a doubt.
Um, yeah, I mean, just a solid player, and a guy that definitely does not get enough credit, but was a fantastic player.
Without a doubt.
So, should we do some honorable mention, like guys that came very close, or do you want to hear this Bleacher Report top 10? I
Uh,
kind of want to hear your reaction to
I
this.
I do want to hear the Bleacher Report top 10, so
Okay,
let's just do that.
so
Because my
number
honorable
one,
mentions are guys you put in there.
okay, I have a lot of honorable mentions.
Yeah.
Actually, maybe not that many.
Yeah, there's a number of people
I
that
have a
are
long
close,
list
but
of people, but then I also took 5 of them from that list and they made my list. So it's not as
yeah,
long as I thought.
yeah, yeah.
Okay. This Bleacher Report list. Number 1, Michael Jordan. Nothing
Okay.
controversial there.
Yep.
They have Bill Russell number 2 all time.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
I knew you would hate that.
Oh my God. All right, here's the
Um,
thing. Here's the thing. Michael,
this is from, keep in mind, this is from 2013, I want to say. So it's a
okay,
little bit
okay.
dated, but
That makes it better. That makes it better because at this point, LeBron wasn't necessarily number 2 all time in my
right.
opinion.
But
But
you would still probably have Russell below a
oh yeah,
few of the people that are coming up.
yeah,
I mean, we
yeah.
know you would because we've mentioned them.
We just started. Yeah.
Number 3, Magic Johnson. Number
Okay.
4, Kareem. Number 5, Larry Bird. They have
Okay.
LeBron down at number 6.
Yeah.
Um, which I feel like is still somewhat controversial because he has only won 2. He's won the 2 titles after this, but it's not like he's won 6 titles and he'd only won 1 at this point.
Yeah. He had won 2, and that was the thing. Like he was widely considered the best player in the league at this point, and like
Yeah,
historically so. The only knock on him for a long time was he didn't have the
he
ring.
didn't win.
But then he'd
Yeah,
won 2 at this point. He was back-to-back MVP. He has 4 MVPs at this point. Like,
yeah.
come on now, he's better than yeah. He was, but it's fine. Keep going.
7, they have Wilt, who neither of us mentioned in our top 5.
Yeah.
They have Tim Duncan at 8, Shaq
Yeah.
all the way down at 9, and then 10 they have Hakeem Olajuwon,
You
who
don't have Kobe on this list.
no, they don't. I had Hakeem
That's
on my short list with like a question mark because
yeah.
he's someone that I feel like is a lot of fun to watch, but I don't know that he was like I don't know if he was he's definitely not good to make my top 5 necessarily, I
Yeah.
would say.
Look,
Um,
he's unbelievably good.
yeah,
I would agree he shouldn't be on that list, but he was unbelievably good. One of only 3 players ever to win MVP and Defensive Player of the Year in the same season.
yeah.
So we talk about that both sides of the ball dominance.
I think maybe the
Um,
knock on him is that like he couldn't. beat MJ, right? They won the
But
titles when he was gone. And I mean,
yeah,
no one,
no
well, I
one
mean, people
could,
did, people beat MJ because he didn't win
but
every year he was in.
not in the 90s.
Yeah, no one beat him then, but
Yeah,
you know, that is, I think, still, you can't bring up Hakeem without saying like, he couldn't get past the Bulls,
right,
really.
right. Because like, if you want to say he couldn't beat Michael, let's say you have him as the second best player in the 90s, that's still got to be up there, right? Like
Yeah,
most of the guys on that list didn't beat Michael just because a lot of them didn't even play him.
right,
So like, it's just that's unfair. It's a huge knock. It's certainly something, but he was
right.
really great. I like he's not above Kobe. He's not that high on a list. I don't think he deserves it, but
Mhm.
was a great player.
And I guess 2013, Kobe was still not done at this point either. So
Yeah, but
maybe
at
that's
this
part of
point,
it. But
what do
Kobe
you have
didn't
left to
do that much
accomplish?
after this.
I was gonna say that's
Yeah,
around when he got hurt. It was probably a year after that where he tore his Achilles. So like Kobe
yeah.
had won
I
the
don't
five
know.
rings. He had established like the
Yeah,
fact that you don't have Kobe on that list is crazy.
I know. I
'Cause,
thought you'd have an interesting reaction to that one.
yeah, LeBron. The time it came out makes LeBron a little more okay,
I
and then
still feel like he
Bill
should probably
Russell
be a
shouldn't
little
be.
bit higher though.
Yes, I agree. I mean, he should have been ahead of Bill Russell at that time.
Two titles, two Finals MVPs, four regular season MVPs.
Yeah,
Um,
playing the
yeah,
game in a way like no one had ever seen before, right? Where he is Magic size up and down the floor as far as height and ability to pass and run the fast break, but he was a lot bigger and more powerful than Magic
yeah.
and way more athletic. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so he's basically Magic Johnson if you take everything that Magic Johnson has that's good, and then you just like go and improve like half of his weaknesses, right? Like where now he can score the ball at a much higher rate. He's
Yeah.
athletic, he's strong, it's he's better defensively. It really I think it to me, I've said this, he's second all time, definitively below Michael to me, but he is far above whoever is third.
Mm.
But at that time, no,
Man, I would
that's not the
love
case.
if there was only some way to see prime LeBron versus prime Michael. I just think that would be such an interesting
Oh, it'd
because
be
I
so
really don't think it's as far as some people think based on just the advancements in
yeah,
like athletics at this
yeah.
point.
Yeah, it's like it's not ridiculous to say LeBron is the best of all time to me. Like
Talent wise, I would say,
I
yeah.
definitely think he's not, but um especially to me the thing that just sets him apart is if you just go watch the way he played in the playoffs with the Cavs those 4 years, his second stint. Oh, man. I certainly have never seen a basketball player that good. The way he played,
Mm,
I've never seen anyone play at that level. Um, I wish I could have watched Mike live
yeah,
and see because I think Mike was that good, but he's unbelievable.
yeah. And I would say I'm one of the biggest LeBron haters, but I will say a lot of my arguments against LeBron are not to do with basketball talent. It's more like
Right.
character and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
can't
Yeah.
fault him there.
Hey.
Was there anyone else that you had considered that we haven't mentioned?
Um Considered ish is Steph.
Yeah, me too.
So he would probably be like 9 or 10 on a list if I did a full top 10. So just a couple
Mhm.
spots behind what's on here. Um,
I think he has a very decent chance to
right.
be in like a top, even like a top five all time, depending how the rest of his career goes.
Yeah. Well, he easily
Because
could be
he has
finish.
like his accolades right now combined with how he's changed the game and stuff, right? Like part of what when I would consider the top two with like MJ and LeBron is just like how they changed the game. Sort of like I think
Hmm. Hmm.
MJ like brought a whole new aspect to the game that hasn't necessarily like I think LeBron is really good at what he does. Like I think he's just better at doing things that other people can do, sort of, if that makes sense. He does them at a
Sure.
higher level, whereas MJ did stuff that no one else could do. And I
Right.
think Steph has a little bit of that where like you didn't see these like just, you know,
Yeah.
catch and pop 3-point guys as much before
No, I
Steph.
mean, if
Um,
if if you look at the team statistics for like 3-point attempts by teams
mhm.
eh, up until the last 5-ish years, maybe a little more than that now, it's insane how the entire league has completely changed the way they play.
Yeah.
And it's because of the Warriors, right?
Right.
Like Klay Thompson is phenomenal, but at the end of the day, it's what Steph does. And that's the so to me, the biggest knock on Steph was his individual performances early in his career, not early in his career, but when he started winning. The fact that he was never the best performer on a championship team in the
Mhm.
playoffs was a huge knock to me, right? Last year, what he did in the finals is what to me like jumped him up there. Like that was an
He was
incredible
he was
performance,
unplayable.
right? It was just like one of those performances where you're just watching it and it's like this guy is the best player on the floor, and there's no question about it. And
Yeah.
if he loses, it's going to be because the Celtics as a team were able to rally together and perform
Right.
better than the Warriors as a team. Well, even though Steph was doing everything he could, like
Yeah.
he willed that team
He
to a championship win.
it looked like you were watching someone play 2K as the Warriors, but in real life.
Yeah, it's one of those where it's just like a few games into that series, you're just watching and you're just every game you're like, man, I just watched a historic performance, and game after game, um, he did that. And so to me, that's what bumped him up where I'm like, all right, he is top 10 all time after what he did in the finals. And the biggest thing to me that has an argument for he can be higher is the fact that there is a very big aspect of the game that he is the best at ever.
Mhm.
And it's not close. Like the number of shooting statistics that are just mind boggling with how good Steph Curry is. Like you think about in 2015-16, he set the single season 3-point makes record with 406, something like that. Nobody else had ever made 300 in a season. And he had the previous like four best seasons
Yeah.
at like 270 something, 280, 260 something. And then he hit 400. It's just ridiculous. And now
Yeah.
those other people have hit high volume of threes, but like James Harden has had some 300 plus year 3-point makes, but he's not like he's shooting them at like 8 to 10% less efficient than Steph is.
Even just
Um,
watching Steph shoot is mind-boggling.
it's
Like
like
when you watch clips of him just draining shots.
yeah, he
It's
steps over half court and legitimately every
yeah.
team is nervous. I had a picture of a stat in here um, that I saved recently just because it like you'll see these stats about his shooting every now and it just is like terrifying. Oh yeah, consecutive games with a 3-point make. So just consecutive games where they make at least three in NBA
Mhm.
history. Um, there's only three players that have done it in 100 consecutive games ever. Kyle Korver did it 127 games in a row, third place. Steph did it 157 games in a row. And then he also now is currently done it 197 games in a row. And this was like a few days ago.
Yeah.
So it's just ridiculous. And the number of stats that are like that. So that's certainly a good argument for him, but
Yeah. Not maybe
not
not quite. Maybe if we keep doing this for the next 5 years, we revisit it and he's in there. Who
exactly.
knows?
He very well could be. But
How do you okay, so what do you think of my list? Well, we did this with the NFL quarterbacks. How would you rate my list out of 10?
I give it like a 7. Like
Okay.
nothing everything you said, there's an argument to be made.
Yeah.
I think Kobe's too low. That's the
Mhm.
biggest qualm I'd have with your list.
I think would you say it was accurate my description prior that all five of my guys have a spot to have a
Oh yeah.
reasonable argument to be on here that it might, discrepancies between where you have them ranked might be the bigger question.
That is a list that someone that has spent their life involved with the NBA, covering the NBA could put together. You know what I
All
mean?
right. I'm
So
happy with that.
yeah,
I'm happy with
so
that.
it's a good list.
Sweet. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Rank and Debate podcast. We really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did and you're watching on YouTube, please consider hitting the like button. If you're listening on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or any other podcasting service, please consider following the podcast, subscribing, whatever it is you do on that podcast service, and tell a friend about our podcast. It'd be really cool if we could get some more people listening to this, more people sharing their opinions on these lists. So if you have a friend that you think would like our podcast, feel free to send it over their way or just mention it to them. That would be really awesome. Hope you have a great day.
tied back your hair. You've never seen such a long stare. I couldn't hold it back if I tried. I never tried. And your advice always seemed to be on time. You quote to me every Bible line. Soon I'll quote them back. Our eyes and we're right back, holding hands, wearing your Georgia cap. Nothing shall come of nothing.